Welcome to the 29th episode of the Unifying Force. I'm Kat, joined by Dave and Gio. How is everybody?
Doing well, thanks.
I am doing well as well.
So today we thought it'd be fun to kind of freewheel it. And in honor of the fact that we finally hocked Trek this week with Wrath of Khan watch along, yes, Notman, we did that. We would like to also discuss what makes a great sequel. And talking of like some of the best sequels ever made, two of which we watched this week, and then with our, of course, our beloved Star Wars franchise. So, who would like to kick off this conversation?
Well, I suppose I am one of the ones that advocates hawking the Trek the most. So I guess that will be me. I mean, how can you argue with Wrath of Khan? Wrath of Khan is one of the few, I think, sequels in the history of sequels that arguably, well, not even arguably in the Star Trek franchise, but surpasses the original, and you can go with surpasses the original on a number of factors in that, because number one, Wrath of Khan is far superior to Star Trek the Motion Picture, which had its own pitfalls and things. I think Wrath of Khan, given as a sequel to the original show, the original series episode Space Seed, surpasses that. Technologically, budget-wise, it was a show versus a movie, but absolutely amazing. But there's probably a list of less than 10, really, in my mind, sequels that really surpass the original. And of course it relates here really well, because I think in the company I'm in that no one would really argue that Empire is probably another one of those. Don't you think?
Maybe just. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the Wrath of Khan and the Empire Strikes Back line up really nicely as classic examples, not only of some of the best sequels ever, and for all those reasons you mentioned, exceeding the original but also building on it, but also there are themes that are kind of similar in both, in terms of not just the filmic aspect, like the technological improvements, the kind of braver cinematography, the use of editing, sound mixing, the score really carrying certain scenes but quietening down at particular moments to allow those character interactions to happen, and for the dialogue to shine through where it can, a lot more than the first film in the series. And while on the contrary, the kind of differences between the Star Trek universe and the Star Wars universe come out nicely when you compare the two films, because, and this is something we can go on to discuss further, you get the really nice comparison of Star Trek being the very specific classic science fiction itself, with some of the military sci-fi, the forward thinking, the social commentary, the elements that make science fiction a specific genre, and Star Trek itself a unique take on that genre, a kind of subspecialty within the science fiction genre, versus Star Wars, which is very much very loosely sci-fi, but more familiar to, say, a space fantasy, a space opera, a space western in the fantastical genre. And that's really where the two franchises, the IPs, diverge. So it's a really good discussion to have, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, Wrath of Khan also, of course, as Dave mentioned, being a double sequel to its own TV episode and the motion picture, which, by the way, the motion picture finally getting a restored, really nice collector's edition director's cut this year. But that movie also, likes to bask in all of its special effects as opposed to really hammering down telling a story, even though the plot is somewhat interesting. But Wrath of Khan definitely has, it feels more like it's trying to tell a story than it is showcasing, hey, look how cool this is. And of course, Ricardo Montalban's Khan is just one of the best sci-fi characters ever. And this movie has arguably the greatest, nerdiest line in all of sci-fi geekdom. This is Sadie Alpha. Ahab chasing Moby Dick. It's a great movie, and none of the other Star Trek movies have come close to matching it. And several other Star Trek movies have tried copying it with a whole bridge duel between the captains and things like that, but they don't really come close. And of course, Wrath of Khan is the one that gets memed the most. Or come on, and will and always shall be your friend. So that's obviously one of the greatest sequels ever made. Another one we have here, as we already talked about, The Empire Strikes Back. This is of course
a lovely case.
It still follows the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey on the next logical step of it. But people say it's darker. I don't think it's darker per se. It just focuses more on character than on the action and set pieces, and that makes for a more compelling drama in a way, even though I prefer the original, but I can see why everybody loves that movie. And that's another one which hasn't really been surpassed. Never mind how low the bar might be for the films, but that's that's another one of the great. Definitely for what Gio was saying, the themes are very similar. Everything dives more into character and self-reflection for that film, which makes it fantastic. And I have two other films counting as greatest sequels ever made. You might be able to know what they are.
Oh, I would. I'm so interested to hear what you think the greatest sequels ever are.
Yeah, it'd be nice to. I've got like a mental note of the first things come to my mind, but let's go around. Let's see yours.
Godfather Part 2, so much better than the original. I like the fact that it's doing the dual story. Because the first movie, it's like this family drama, but I didn't find the plot of the first one to be that compelling. Like I didn't buy as much into Michael's transformation. I'd seen the ending like 50 times before it actually, by ending, I mean the last 45 minutes before I'd actually seen the whole movie. But when I saw the second one, it's like, man, this is a really great movie because you're getting to see how Don Corleone like fought his way to the top, and seeing Michael more come into himself as this and much more into coming into himself as the new Don. And I thought it was a much better character-driven story. Because the first one, you're just kind of meeting everybody, and the ensemble's so huge. But now that they got all the introductions out of the way, they could really get down to telling a really great story. And two really great stories essentially in the same amount of time, so it doesn't feel as long as the first one does. And it, to my knowledge, this is the only first and second film ever to win Best Picture back to back, which is probably not going to happen again because people don't put as much thought.
I cannot imagine how, considering that Hollywood is in general out of original ideas, and imagining that the reboots or reboots to live action that are so much the norm right now would ever do that.
Yeah, and they seem to have like a allergy to sequels generally, beyond the ones that we've mentioned. But I really do like what you mentioned about The Godfather, because part 2, it's really fascinating to think about how you've got a really in-depth origin story there of one of the principal leads from the first film, but you're exploring that in a sequel. And to my mind, none of the, at least the kind of top-rated and favorite sequels that might be buzzing around our heads when we talk about best sequels ever, do such a brave thing, which is to go back and then have the kind of side-by-side. And the first film does feel kind of laborious at times. I don't have the nostalgic connection to the Godfather film the way I would to, the early days of watching the first time you come across Star Trek or Star Wars. But I definitely appreciate what you're saying. The first film, kind of the acts are so big and the number of characters is so large that you almost feel that the scope of story that was going in the first film would have been even better suited to now the long form television series. And one could argue The Sopranos is exactly that sort of format, which works so well when you've got just more screen time to explore the characters. But yeah.
And see, that's kind of the weird thing about why Star Trek the motion picture didn't necessarily work the way that it should have, because it should have essentially been the sequel to the original series shows. Is they didn't need, or they shouldn't have needed, the amount of explanation of characters and things that they tried to put in there. Forget the current events. It's like, oh, we just launched a spacecraft named Voyager. What would happen? But it should have been that sequel. It should have been
Voyager.
Yeah. Is we should have gotten that, but it just, I don't know, for whatever reasons, the motion picture is the one that just, it's the odd man out in the Star Trek films. Even the uniforms were completely and totally different, as we've got all the blue and whatever, everything else is the red with the bib, and that kind of, goes, I think pretty consistently all the way through the original cast, all the way through generations. But why we didn't get a good first Star Trek film, but we did get the greatest sequel ever. And I say it is definitely the best of the films. Maybe not the favorite. Is I like the lighthearted tone. I love the Voyage Home. Is just the silliness, the joy of that, and it's probably the second most meme worthy of the Star Trek films. Is just a double dumbass on you, and Captain, there be whales here. When Scotty talks into the computer mouse, that's just my But get that. So
and then, what were you gonna say?
Well, we get, you've got like the funny one that's in that sequel, and we can talk a little bit more later about how after you have a great sequel, like then the franchise goes off the rails. But go ahead with did you have more than one?
I had one more.
Okay.
Greatest sequel ever made.
I almost wish we'd written down what we were, and then you could be like, oh, that's the same thing.
Oh, that would have been a good,
yeah.
This, I think, is the most recent greatest sequel ever made. Most people will not argue against this one.
Ooh.
Yes. Yeah.
As one friend of mine summed up in his review on Movie Web on the release day, he said, "Epic Greek tragedy, Batman style," and it is. It's what I like about that one is like it's a hybrid film. It's like the first half is a crime drama where you could swap out the Joker for any number of other Batman villains and still have the same story, and then right when that semi truck rams the SWAT van into the river, that's like the visual metaphor, best visual metaphor you're going to get. Okay, this story that we've been telling is over with now. The rest of this movie is going to be an action-packed anarchist romp run by the Joker.
Yeah.
And it was just great. I thought it was a very much more realistic version of what the Harvey Dent story would be. Because I like the Two-Face character in like some of the comics and the games, but sometimes it is a little weird. Like, okay, he's got like extreme bipolar or something like that, and his minions tolerate the fact that he makes decisions for his crime enterprise by flipping a coin, which just doesn't track at all. And so I thought the way they did that movie was so much better. And some people kind of criticize the final act, that it's essentially repeating the hospital game except on the ferry boats, but I still really liked it. It has the X factor with Heath Ledger, probably the best performance in a comic book movie, bar none. And it's interesting story because they've designed it specifically so that Bruce Wayne doesn't really have much of a character arc. It's like Harvey's the one who has the character arc, and Bruce, as we could see, is really naive, thinking he's going to retire, and it's like, we know that's not going to happen. Rachel voices our opinions for us, and girlfriends of comic book characters get killed all the time in the comics. That was like the first time they actually did it in a movie of a comic book movie. I'm like, oh, they actually did that, and I didn't think that was going to happen because,
Yeah.
of course, the movies aren't usually going to be that ballsy. But yeah, and then Gary Oldman coming in again for the win, playing probably the best Commissioner Gordon. So that's a fantastic. And the ending is so dark. I mean, yes, it would have been much more logical to just blame the Joker and his minions for all the killings, but it's still, it works so well. It's like an excellent movie, which its follow-up tried to live up to, but
difficult to reach.
The Carte Blanche project is the third movie, so not that surprising they didn't look. But yeah, so that's another great, one of the greatest sequels ever made.
So that was unexpected from you, Catherine. That is not where I was expecting you to go. But let me get back to that in a second. But
yeah,
I'm going to argue you to in the. I am a major fan. I love Dark Knight, but I'm a major fan of '89 Batman. Okay, love '89 Batman, and I'll argue that in ways, not all ways that people love, that Batman Returns could be argued as even surpassing Batman '89. Okay, which we love, and it's there. But in Batman Returns, you got to turn loose Tim Burton. Tim Burton got to be Tim Burton. He was holding it back. He was making a mainstream film in '89, and then they're like, well, you did so well. Would you like to go again? And he went nuts.
Yeah. No holds barred. Tim Burton to the max.
Yeah, let's strap missiles onto penguins. Yeah. Everybody's like, that's a great idea.
What I love about that movie is that it's the Moses story. Except the penguin is Moses. He does all the same things.
It really kind of is the baby in the basket, and you find out.
And he wants recognition for his freakish, all of his people, and tries to become the king of the kingdom, and then that doesn't work. So he's like, I'm going to kill all the firstborn children of the city. And so it's like, I like that. It's like, he's the one who has the arc in that one as well. And DeVito's Penguin is one of my favorite comics. I mean, I know it's not remotely accurate to the comics. I mean, Colin Farrell's Penguin in the new Batman is the only live action accurate Penguin pretty much in movies that we've ever had.
Right. But interesting, because I still need to catch that one.
Yeah, you got there is the 60s Batman movie, Burgess Meredith.
Sort of. I mean.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, Batman Returns is great. Part of it, I didn't really care for Batman '89. I didn't feel there was much of a story there. It's like, why are we spending 45 minutes giving the Joker an origin story that has nothing to do with the rest of his actions in the movie? And Batman's just kind of there. He doesn't really have much of a story. It's like, so it's kind of like, it's similar in Batman Returns. It's kind of like, there was a really great scene where Bruce initially is rooting for the Penguin. He likes him. Mm-hmm. Oh, you've got to find your parents. And then in like the very next scene, he's suddenly against him. I'm like, wait, what happened there? And I thought that would have been a neat thing to string along, because we know the Penguin's evil because he's the Penguin.
Right.
But Bruce doesn't know that. I would have strung that along a little bit further, and of course would have made the climax with the kids so much darker, just because why not? I mean, but it is a great movie. I mean, and as far as ranking those four, I probably put Wrath of Khan lower, simply because if I'm going to call a movie the greatest sequel ever made, then that has to be by virtue of the fact that the first movie was considered really good too.
Well, yeah.
And
interesting caveat.
Wasn't considered that great. So, but Star Trek 2 is still a really good movie.
One thing I would ask is, your propositions, Godfather Part 2 and The Dark Knight, are those what you consider the greatest sequels ever, or examples of that, or your favorites? Or is there an overlap there? Because I kind of feel that always with film, TV, music, video games, everything, there's what you can kind of regard as what you might think is the greatest, the best example of that, but your favorite might be quite different, or your favorites.
They're both in that realm, because one
both
is
columns.
Sequels, and by sequels, I'm primarily thinking of the first sequel, because usually after that, it's like, I'll enjoy watching a new Star Wars movie as much as the next person, but it doesn't mean
the second film, the original use of the term sequel.
The original sequel. So I'd say Dark Knight and Godfather 2 are probably two of the best sequels. And then, but again, Empire is one I like the original Star Wars better than Empire.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me. I didn't.
I've always loved the original Star Wars the best out of all of them. So that's why I put Empire would probably be in third place on that fourth list ranking. I'd probably put go back and forth between Godfather 2 and Dark Knight is which one's my favorite sequel ever made.
See, I'm a little bit different even than that, because I acknowledge like Wrath of Khan as the best of the Star Trek films and the best sequel, but my favorite is 4, is Voyage Home.
Yeah.
I love kind of the wacky one. I think I gave the analogy, I think it's the Thor Ragnarok of the Star Trek franchise. Is it just kind of the wacky out there one? I know. Is it?
Yeah.
And Empire, absolutely the best of the OT, I think, but my favorite is Jedi. Again, the one that's a little bit more lighthearted and that. Whereas I just said Dark Knight, you can throw it for me, both the original and the sequel, I think both were really good. I enjoyed a lot of the Liam Neeson and the origin of that, and the retake of the original one, but Heath Ledger's performance was amazing.
Well, that's also why I put it so high, because like you said, the Liam Neeson one, Batman Begins, is really good, and to try and top that or come close to that, like that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that was a really unusual, they picked a different kind of Batman villain who was actually, you didn't know was going to be the villain originally. And, because Ra's al Ghul was huge, ridiculously huge in the comic books when in the 80s and 90s when I was largely reading that. And then we see him brought to life in film with Liam Neeson.
Yeah.
I think Talia wasn't done as well as Talia could have been done.
Another conversation about sequels is that the third act always falls into the third act trap, it seems, where you have to take something from the first, tie it back into the first movie. It's like, we don't always have to do that. And it usually comes at the expense of the story in some way. Like, yes, I know it's comics accurate that there is a comic storyline in Batman where Bane is part of the League of Shadows and Talia al Ghul is there with him. It doesn't mean you put that into the third movie, especially with that ham-fisted twist and the third act. And I mean, I meant the IMAX of that movie is unbelievable. The scale and the scope of the action is intense and amazing. Some of the best you're going to get out of those 3 movies.
But also, you completely ignore details that made that the greatest story in the comics, which is, Talia al Ghul, I think, was introduced in like Son of the Demon.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Bruce is supposed to have a child with her. Sorry, spoiler alert, people. If you are watching this now and you haven't watched these movies, these are some of our recommendations you should go see. But as I was saying, is even though I put Batman Returns up as a great and amazing Tim Burton sequel, is I prefer the 89. I like the original because the performances of Michael Keaton in that and their performances of Nicholson, I
consider Batman Returns the best of those 4 Burton Schumacher films as well.
Yeah.
I still think Batman Returns as a script has a lot of problems, which is why I didn't put it as the best sequel ever, even though it too had the X Factor performance with Danny DeVito and that very old Victorian creepy take on the Penguin, which I'm like, if only Tim Burton was allowed to go even darker with that, that would be amazing. Like, one thing that's been floated around is the idea that given this new Batman era that they just launched, that one character who they'll probably never do, who would fit in perfectly with the new Batman world, is the Mad Hatter. Because in the comics, Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth, the book which Heath Ledger was given, one of the comics he was given for Dark Knight, he had to put it down after a few pages, like, this is too much, which is crazy to think. Because I love that comic, it is great. But in the comic, it's basically like Dante's Inferno, where Joker's taken over Arkham Asylum, and he's offered to release the guards and the hostages if Batman will just come inside and go on a tour with him. So it's like Batman is Dante, he's being given a tour of hell, and he's seeing how Arkham is just as much responsible for making everybody crazy, and one of the villains in there is the Mad Hatter. And it's hinted that he's actually a pedophile. And he uses the whole Wonderland thing in his Tea Party and Spike Tea for that kind of stuff. And it's like, it's very, it had to be
really gross.
You can't dive into it because it's obviously, comics, but it's there. And it's like, that is so dark. And like, that would fit so perfectly in the new. Of course they won't, because another story that people may remember is that a lot of Batman Returns marketing tie-ins got canceled within about a month before the movie came out, because when they saw the movie and realized it involved a villain who wanted to commit mass murder against children, it's like, sorry, we can't endorse that. And so
Yet we made
They won't sell as many toys.
featuring the Penguin. Yes.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a great shout out to that comic then, because that's territory that a few comic book films, superhero films, and just films generally would even dare to tread, going that dark and that kind of gross with a villain. But again, it's kind of like an exploration of a twisted psyche. So if films and movies are a reflection of society and us, then it's that kind of fascination that, especially in the last couple of years, true crime, both as documentary series and as bases for fiction, has become such a gigantic genre unto itself that it could be interesting if Matt Reeves goes with a sequel to the Batman, that he goes into even darker territory. I was just wondering though, Dave, when you talk about Batman 89, Batman Returns, compared to the Batman Begins and the Dark Knight, it sounds like the Dark Knight doesn't rank up there amongst your favorite sequels, but I guess, would you say you would consider it one of the great sequels, but not among your favorites? Whereas Batman Returns, you prefer.
It's definitely a great second act in that trilogy. It surpasses the third completely. Just not my favorite, because it wasn't as order of magnitude better than the first, than say Wrath of Khan. It's not as order of magnitude better than, it's kind of like why The Godfather Part 2 might not have really been on my list, because the original was so good. Having that as the greatest sequel of all time, that's kind of my logic behind that.
Sure.
So I'm glad you asked that, because I'll use this to introduce one of what I think is the greatest sequels of all time, that I thought Catherine was going to go there. Aliens.
Yeah, that's on my list with The Dark Knight and The Godfather Part 2. Yeah, as both great sequels, some of the greatest ever, and among my favorites too. But yeah, go on.
I mean, that's it. Aliens over Alien. Alien was good, yes, but how many orders of magnitude better is Aliens? Obviously. Oh, Catherine's going to disagree.
I know that's going to be. I know that was going to be. Yeah, this is.
I like Aliens.
Controversial territory for Aliens.
I like it because it's different. It's doing a different genre film. It's an action movie instead of a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that it kind of drags a bit at times, especially in the extended cut. Even though I think the extended cut at times is better than the theatrical cut, it just sort of, it's like, okay, we're watching all these characters. They're kind of goofy. I didn't care for the Newt character at all. At times, I just found that I get why that's there, and the point they're making with Ripley and her, I just found her sometimes kind of annoying. And and the Queen was amazing. The Alien Queen and stuff was amazing. I really liked the whole Bishop character and how she kind of learns to trust him after being so paranoid about it. And so that's definitely a great movie, but I still love the original a lot more, because that's just, it's truckers in space. It's a horror movie. It's claustrophobic, especially as you get closer to the climax. And it's just tension and suspense building throughout that whole thing. So, but Aliens is a very close second.
Yeah.
For me. Yeah.
So Gio, you said that was on your list. Talk about that.
Yeah. So Aliens, I would say, and that specifically looking at the first and second film, is an example of the kind of wider question that I think is interesting, in that, like, the column of favorites and the column of what do you think might be the best. And often that would overlap for most of us, but there can be a difference. I think Aliens, as an individual film, is more enjoyable to revisit than Alien, on a personal sense. And I think kind of like the mass audience kind of general consensus, but I appreciate how Alien is a terrifying film. If someone says to me, what's some of the greatest horror films of all time, Alien is one of the first to come to mind. And I think it's fascinating. It's one that if you're in locked in to revisit it from beginning to end, that's a unique ride. And critically, and if you kind of look at it with that kind of eye, I think Alien might be a superior film to Aliens in terms of like the 3 acts, the characters, and some of the screenwriting craft in a way. But Aliens is just generally on the surface a lot more fun, a lot more kind of engaging because it's the change of genre into a more fast-paced action film. It's almost like a war movie in closed space, humans versus the aliens. And I think that probably gave propulsion to the franchise to then set adventures in terms of the video game universe of Aliens and bringing about some of those titles, which focus more on the adventure action element, with the one exception of Alien Isolation, which is not a game I've personally played, but if anybody likes Alien, ranks that amongst their favorites. Yeah, that is probably the best sequel to Alien in terms of thematically, because it's genuinely just individual isolation, absolute horror, tension and suspense. You don't know what's going on. You're kind of away from a crew. Whereas Aliens as a sequel has that camaraderie because you've got a wider cast that makes it feel kind of like the sort of group friendship feeling that I think draws people to enjoying Firefly, to Star Wars Rebels, to those few but important scenes in the OT with Han, Luke, and Leia, Chewie, 3PO, the droids. That kind of the group dynamic, which I think makes Aliens one that you can revisit more often than Alien, as a kind of blockbuster roller coaster ride. And I would say Aliens is one of the best sequels to, because it adds so much to that universe and to that widening the scope of the franchise. So yeah, if I had to pick, like, if you were saying, well, which Alien film would you rewatch, it would be Aliens, absolutely. Alien, I'd have to be more kind of in the mindset for, and I think it's because it's a very genre film in the horror field.
I think you're right there. I think you've hit on that. It's Alien. Obviously, they didn't know that they were making a franchise when they started that, but Alien is kind of the odd man out in that franchise. It was one that was started off with and was a horror genre film, and then the rest of them were more action movies beyond that. And Aliens, by far, I mean, Alien, 3 again, third act, get off the rail. Yeah. I mean, they're very distinctly good parts of that, but there are parts of that you're like.
The producer's cut, I would say, is a lot better.
Yeah, that was one that was massacred behind the scenes.
The one that's like 40 minutes longer, but that is in itself another genre entirely. It's like a prison movie, basically.
Yeah.
And seeing that whole social dynamic, which I found was interesting, and I liked it, but it didn't feel like an alien movie. It's like it's a prison movie which happens to have an alien in it, and it's like at various points. But yeah, it's not really that. And then the fourth movie is just like, what the hell is it? I liked the ensemble of the crazy crew. It's like this could be maybe an R-rated version of Guardians of the Galaxy. These types of characters, but the story and the way it goes and the thing with Ripley, I'm like, what the? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that's
that was a franchise killer for a while.
How it gets crazy is
a heavy full stop on the Alien franchise for a while after that one. But mentioning Guardians, that's one that I would rank up there. As it has that camaraderie group feel of like the little adventure of the small crew against everything else, that I think Aliens was the first in that franchise to capture. So it makes it a good, it's kind of like another check on the list of why it's a really great sequel, and also why it's an enjoyable film and like amongst my favorite second films in a trilogy, series, or franchise. And just thinking on it, that what Catherine mentioned about how and Dave, that it's once the second film is done, it went off the rails, and Alien 3 and the fourth film have elements of Aliens, but maybe not done so well, or done in an interesting, compelling way, and in a unique way. Reminds me of another second film in a series that I would put up there as one of the greatest ever and one of the favorites, and that is T2, Terminator 2 Judgment
right,
Day.
of course.
That was
Because, yeah, because yeah, I'm glad, because I think that definitely that's a really interesting parallel then to compare with Aliens, because the Terminator films, to an extent, since T2 have just been trying to redo or get even a 100th as close to Terminator 2 Judgment Day as they can, and kind of failing massively. And Aliens, you could say, is the same. They've not returned to that individual alien original film in feeling and genre, and have just tried to make another Aliens to less success. And Terminator's definitely done that.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because both Alien to Aliens and Terminator to Terminator 2 are the same things. The first installment in both of those franchises are horror films.
It's also the same actor, is it not? Or is it in Aliens? It's also the same actor that's in Aliens.
Yes.
Yeah, and then there's the James Cameron.
Bill Paxton had the honor of being killed by a xenomorph, a Yahuta, and a Terminator. All three of those iconic franchises, Alien, Predator, and Terminator. So, which is pretty cool. But yeah, granted, I didn't think the first Terminator was horror, it wasn't scary to me, but I could see definitely that they're trying to go for a more horror vibe in that movie, whereas Terminator 2 is like an action movie. And that's what Cameron did with Alien. Instead of just doing the same thing again, he changed genres on it, which I think makes that does excel. I don't know why I didn't think it. Probably because I haven't seen it. It's funny. I watched Terminator 2 again for the first time in many years, a few years, like 5 years ago. And we're watching this on the 4th of July, and we're like, you know when you watch movies and sometimes the heroes are trying to convince people to help them. It's like, dude, we got to stop this, something crazy. And nobody ever believes them because they think they're crazy, but they don't usually come off as crazy. Well, in Terminator 2, they do come off as crazy, as tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, big time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's actually really good that they actually, but the effects were great, the action was amazing, and it was a really good story. And that's, I think, like you mentioned, the failings of all the Terminator sequels is that they fail to realize the reason that movie worked so well is because it was a different genre film. They weren't just trying to redo the same thing again, and it had a lot of heart to it with a really dramatic ending. And it's like if they just did something different with the concept, it'd be great, but they never bothered doing it. Even when they did the Terminator Salvation movie, which I thought, wow, this is going to be a movie during the Machine War. That could be really cool. And it's recycling the same type of plot. It always has to be some time traveler having to save John Connor or Sarah Connor. This is getting old,
Yeah. Well, at least Salvation went for that risk.
Whereas Dark Fate apparently was supposed to be the first act of a new trilogy of the same type of crap, and it's like,
oh, really? And then
they Linda Hamilton didn't really want to come back.
The franchise in the first minute of the film.
Exactly, and it's just I'm like, I don't get why. It's like you got to do something new. It's like you need to find that, which is why I have hope, a teensy bit of hope for Avatar 2, that maybe they'll do something, in the spirit of it being a, another James Cameron sequel. Maybe it'll be very different from the original. But we'll see where that goes. I was
going to
hold out hope for that because we're not getting Titanic 2.
Well, I wouldn't. I know, but there was a Titanic.
I know. I was.
I think that was a TV mate. Yeah.
There was a Titanic
count as a film.
So is that kind of the formula you just kind of said? Is the acting was great, the action and the effects upped it a notch, because I'm thinking that's what made Wrath of Khan. Is Ricardo Montalban and Shatner being overly Shatner. He just dialed Shatner up a notch. But the effects were greater. We talked about this in the watch along the other night. They had that fly through on the planet scene, which was so cutting edge of digital effects for the time.
That was absolutely
that's what we're talking about in Aliens. What made it better is the acting, that ensemble cast. Sigourney Weaver, just her dialed up a notch and just making Ellen Ripley a badass.
Right, and Dark Knight was the first movie to use IMAX cameras on a commercial, like fiction commercial Hollywood film, even though it was only for 20 minutes of it. So that's another innovation there. But you're right. That's kind of what these sequels have. They have X Factor performances. They up the action and the ante up a notch, but they also have really good story. and they spent time thinking about the story. They didn't just rush to repackage it and just do the same thing. Like there's 7 years between the first 2 Terminator films. Like nobody was screaming for a sequel to that movie, which I think is also part of its success. Nobody expected a sequel to that movie, and then to get it and be that wowed by it, and especially the relationship between John Connor and the T-800 is just wow. That was really really good and really heartfelt. Something you usually don't get in sequels.
Right. And you've gone, and this is another trope that we could talk about on a whole other episode, is you've gone and seen who the most popular character is, and it was the bad guy in the original. So to sell more toys and more merchandise, we got to make the bad guy the good guy, and he's the good guy for like the rest of the franchise.
Yeah, that's another crazy thing where they just took the villain, and it's like, okay, Sarah, now you have to like this guy. Like that movie is so layered with having so many things that set it apart. So yes, that's definitely in the top 5 best sequels of all time for sure.
Yeah, and there's so much nuance because in universe story-wise it works because it's a machine. It can be reprogrammed, and there's an actual logical explanation for it, as well as the character being a fan favorite and are a kind of linchpin of what made the first film so fascinating as a villain. And then I guess you could almost say George Lucas did that to an extent with Vader, because it went from a first film being maybe like the one-note power villain, super villain, striking fear and so on, to then have layers of nuance being related to the main protagonist, our main hero. It couldn't get closer related than that. And then the entire prequel trilogy is seeing Anakin as a hero, essentially, and having that fall, which maybe didn't come so much in the films, but definitely in the Clone Wars series. Because it's hard to think of another second film that does that about flip from villain to heroic character.
They tried to kind of do it with Kylo, and that's the failing of the sequel trilogy, is they're like, oh, Kylo was just such the breakout, we love this character and the mask and the deal, and oh, we got to give him his redemption arc, which you've killed too many people for that, and we don't like it quite as much because you're whiny and emo and just like waving around.
The whiny and emo part in particular, because Vader killed a lot more people.
Well, yes, completely and totally true.
He made decisions and stuck with them, whereas Kylo Ren was teetering, and you do get what they're going for thematically with the pull between light and dark, and it's almost made too explicit in The Force Awakens, even when he's talking to the Vader mask and saying, I feel the pull to the light.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange because the light is the default, the good, the kind of normal, healthy balance. So it's not something that would so much pull you. That's the dark, the temptation that would kind of pull you from the regular path. And that's kind of what George Lucas was saying with the Force being the natural state. The concept of the light side of the Force wasn't mentioned in the original trilogy. When Luke has that conversation with Leia, the sibling conversation in Return of the Jedi, he says specifically about Vader, I can bring him back to the good side. He doesn't say the light side. That kind of making it so obviously a binary came a little bit later. And that's something that made The Last Jedi, I think, a love or hate type film, and very divisive, because Kylo Ren has been definitely the villain in the first film, like Arnold Schwarzenegger's character as the T-800 in the first Terminator. And then to have the kind of uncertainty with him within the film played off against the uncertainty of good or bad within the main protagonist in Rey makes the film have this tonal imbalance throughout it. And in some ways, I've seen The Last Jedi be described as a film that could have essentially been like a trilogy's worth of film in itself, in terms of how much the characters kind of change, or what they're trying to do with Rey and Kylo. And it's kind of rushed to fit into a 2.5-hour film, which somehow still, when you're experiencing it, feels like a long film of that length. And I think that's why it's
that was also trying to make up ground from. It was also trying to make up ground from the previous movie, because the first one didn't have any character arcs.
Exactly. Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And
that's kind of why we're not, offering that as a good thing on our list of, sequels. I mean, it's the movie of that trilogy, and
Well, I
Yeah.
would say that
I have a curveball.
Last
to
Jedi is
throw out
also
there.
one of the great sequels, but again, by my own criteria, that the first movie had to be really good.
Yeah.
And because of Force Awakens, and it like yeah, if you switch off your brain and just watch Force Awakens as a fun little Star Wars movie, yeah, it's really fun. But as the 7th installment of the Skywalker saga, continuing after Return of the Jedi, no. And so, but it is interesting to watch 7 and 8 in one sitting and just forget Episode 9, cast that out into the ether.
Oh yeah.
Because 7 and 8 feel like one 4.5-hour Star Wars movie, because 7 is introducing everything and there's no character arcs, and Episode 8 has the character arcs that they should have had in the first movie, as well as some from the second, and it feels like one solid, pretty good, entertaining movie as one big block. But based on that, even though I do love Last Jedi a lot, because of my criteria, I can't put it up there as the greatest of all the sequels.
No, and Last Jedi, I have really specific issues with, is like, the level of unnecessary things that pop up in there, like Canto Bite would just cutting room floor. Please, just that.
Well, that was the I liked that aspect for the military industrial complex, because that's like, where did the First Order come from? All these people. Where I love the idea that where the DJ points out that, hey man, this guy sells to the rebels, and he sells.
That hologram of the X-wing and the TIE fighter being.
I would have rewritten
that was such an interesting
scene.
Question. Yeah.
I would have rewritten that scene to have him kind of egging on Rose, because Rose isn't in there when he shows that hologram.
Yeah.
Like, I would have had him egging on her about that, because that's in his personality. He's just kind of egging on because he's a jerk. And Finn would be like trying to keep peace between these two for this mission they have to go on, and BB-8 would kind of be looking at the kids fighting and have to take the authority in the mission, and that would be how they get caught.
Well, see, that's what what I say about The Last Jedi, and the argument against it being one of the better sequel parts is things like that we're saying, well, this should have happened. This should have happened. This could have happened. This would have, even Canto Bite could have been made relevant for that reason, if you take out, like the abused space horses or whatever.
I thought it worked for Finn's
Greyhound track.
I thought it worked for Finn's character arc, because in the first movie he's just trying to run away from everything. So in the second movie, of course, he's going to want to continue doing that, and it's because of what happens on Canto Bite that he finally learns that, maybe there's maybe I shouldn't be running away from everything. So that's like a character building moment for him. But again, the first movie's failings. It's like, because I saw the Last Jedi 6 times in the theater. Best of that. I think it's the best of the Disney Star Wars so far.
Oh, wow.
And again, that bar is pretty low.
Of the best of the Star Wars films.
Of everything Disney has done visually with Star Wars, with the TV shows, the movie, Last Jedi is easily top of the mountain. That's going to be hard. The stuff they did with Luke was amazing. The scene with Luke and Yoda, that is so perfect. Like, somebody needs to make a poster of Luke and Yoda sitting in front of the burning Jedi tree, and all the symbolism of that, and how amazing that sequence is. And it's like, that's an excellent movie. It's funny that the non-Star Wars fans get why that is a great movie. The Star Wars diehards and the fanboys, like, I remember when I watched that movie when it first came out, and I went online to see all the reviews. 99% of it was people complaining either that they didn't like Luke, or their fan theories didn't pay off, but they weren't really talking about the movie as a whole and the character arcs and all of that, which was really frustrating. But that's going to be hard to dethrone, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. Plus, it's like, I remember after I walked out of the theater from seeing Force Awakens the first time, I thought, I guess this is just going to be a remake of all 3 movies. But then I thought to myself, wow, what would the faster, more intense version of Empire Strikes Back even look like? Because Attack of the Clones was also deliberately slow paced, because it's also, copying that plot structure to a T. But The Last Jedi is the faster, more intense version. Everybody says it's so different, but if you put all 3 of those second act of the trilogies of Star Wars alongside each other, they're all the same plot, the same type of character arcs and story.
Yeah, I think that's definitely clear when you kind of step back and look at it. And that's another interesting angle to kind of look at it as, when you're comparing an individual who's so invested as, let's say, the Mark Hamill phrase, ultra passionate fans, the UPFs, that you have these expectations for what you want in the second film, or another film in the franchise, in the series. You might have all these ideas, and then it's managing expectations. But that's on the viewer, on the consumer of the entertainment, to manage our expectations, to be able to look at something a little bit more objectively. Of course, it's all going to be subjective in the end. It's just, what gels with you, what vibes with you, the time you first see it. And then if you think it's worth revisiting, a second, third, and so on. But I definitely remember seeing that as well. I had that exact same feeling with The Force Awakens compared to The Last Jedi, in that walking out of The Force Awakens, I thought, oh, that's all they did?
Right.
And then if we go to Catherine's metric of, if you're judging, if you're having the greatest of all time sequel conversation, it has to have had a really strong first film, then and then the second one to exceed it, then I would say The Last Jedi doesn't have that, as you mentioned, because The Force Awakens, to our analyses, is kind of middling, or sub expectation, and
Yeah,
that's not.
But
Yeah.
that's going to give different interpretations for different fan base. I think a lot
sure.
of people who were, new-ish to Star Wars, or coming into Star Wars for The Last Jedi, enjoyed it for its, tone and theme that kind of harkened back to, A New Hope. Whereas we are judging it more harshly because of it harkening back to A New Hope and not doing it successfully.
Yeah, like Phantom Menace, I think, does it successfully, because that also has so many parallels with the original film, but it still feels like a new story, because it kind of is.
Yeah. I think that's what. Yeah. And that's why The Last Jedi as a sequel works, if you step back, really well, because
and
as a sequel, it goes beyond.
Also, Wrath of Khan is one of the greatest films as well, and not the best film in the Star Trek franchise, but it too doesn't really fit into my criteria, because I thought Star Trek: The Motion Picture was a bit of a dud, but it's still such a great movie that you have to mention Wrath of Khan in a sequel conversation.
Yeah.
And you can call that's why I mentioned Space Seed as well, because you get that it's a double sequel. Is Wrath of Khan the sequel that we wanted to the original series, the whole original series? Yes, it is. It's what those characters are doing now. If you were to do that as a sequel, is watch, the original Star Trek series from the 60s and skip entirely the motion picture and watch Wrath of Khan and the rest. Oh, there we go.
Right, because the motion pictures seem to be designed for people who hadn't seen Star Trek before, which is why it gets bogged down in exposition and showcasing all the great billion-and-one shots of the Enterprise. Whereas Wrath of Khan is like, okay, you all know who it is now, or who all these people are. Here's the story we want to tell.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I think that's also what helped Star Wars, in a sense, eclipse 2001, and that 2001 does have a story and it does have characters, but it is a bit of I admit I would have a hard time trying to sell 2001 on Gen Z, compared to people, real cinephiles, because it's a movie which also showcases its amazing special effects, whereas Star Wars, as George did, he assembled the class of 2001, as he called it, all the veterans from that movie. But it doesn't get bogged down in trying to showcase the effects and like, ooh, look at this. It's immediately jumping right into the story and the characters.
Yeah.
And that was something I found interesting also, is that when 2001 came out, you would have thought with how successful it was that there would have been a slew of imitators, but there wasn't. It's like sci-fi was a dead genre at that time. And it continued to stay dead for the next 9 years until George resurrected it again with Star Wars, which is like, wow.
Yeah. It's the object of how George uses the effects to tell the story, as opposed to the effects being the story. Because amazing effects. Yes, on the backs of 2001, you enter with the Star Destroyer coming right over there. That's the great effect. But is he like doing that just to show you how cool the Star Destroyer is? No, he's telling the story with it. Boom, right off the bat.
Right.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention one thing about greatest in the Disney Star Wars is The Last Jedi. I'm going to put Rogue One against that, but that's not a sequel. That's not a thing. So we don't need to discuss that here.
Yeah, that's a prequel. That could be in our best prequel conversation.
Well, advanced prequel conversation, or August is coming up, fans, as when we're talking about, we'll be talking about Rogue One and the things and what's good about that when we talk about our Andor show preview, which
that would be fun if we do a deep dive on Rogue One.
Yeah,
a lot of things to say about that film.
Absolutely. And it goes back to some of what makes the sequels that we've mentioned as some of the greatest of all time, because you're kind of combining a few different genres that maybe the classic film or the original films that audiences, remember, aren't that familiar with the kind of boots on the ground war feel, which is what made Aliens very different to Alien, and to have that kind of uptick of action and spectacle rather than a slow paced film is what makes T2 Judgment Day really stand out in a different feel to the Terminator, the first film. And going back full circle, you could say is what makes the Wrath of Khan fantastic, because you have action that is understated and utilized really well in a few scenes that give space to the characters to actually have conversations, and they're interesting conversations. It's not just kind of filler that you might get in other films. It's the kind of three-way dynamic that you have between Kirk, Burns, and Spock when they talk about the use of the Project Genesis as something that Spock sees as a utilitarian principle of just, okay, you can then rebirth life on dead planets and dead moons, which makes it very clearly a science fiction film that differentiates it as Star Trek from Star Wars and other things.
Well, and the thing that takes that there too is the choice of the name Genesis, that it is literally life from death, giving it the biblical connotation, and then giving you Khan, who wants to use it as a weapon.
Yeah, and I think you also hit the nail on the head there. It's what the ultimate difference is between Star Wars and Star Trek, is that Star Wars is fantasy, Star Trek is science fiction.
Yeah.
Star Trek, you're going to sit there, and before you blow them up, you're going to sit there and talk about how you're going to blow them up. That's the whole thing, where Kirk manages to get over on Khan, not because of Khan's superior tactical knowledge, you know.
Well, no, because throughout that
knows
movie,
something. He knows a little technical detail about the ships that Khan doesn't.
Yeah, and throughout the movie, Khan's son keeps telling him, "Dude, you've got it. We're done. Let's just go." You know, because it's like it's not worth it anymore.
Yeah, he was.
He just keeps pushing him on that, and Khan is just too much in Captain Ahab mode. And it's like, no.
Yeah,
but
because
on the one hand, it's surprising for a movie like that is so good. You never have Khan and Kirk in the same room.
That was the point that I really wanted to say. Yeah,
because
incredible writing.
Seed, they are
not need the villain and hero to meet.
And in Space Seed, they do have a showdown, a kind of a fight and all that. And it's been a while since I've watched it, so I'd have to go back and watch to see how that exactly went down. Because I would imagine that Khan would have laid out Kirk, no problem, but because of who he is. But it's crazy that you kind of want Ahab to meet Moby Dick in the movie, and he doesn't.
Yeah, that being it the sequel to Space Seed is, you know, he's far superior. He's going to take Kirk down. Kirk, you know, cheats, as Kirk tends to do. That's a recurring theme.
Slight tendency.
That's something I think Star Wars needs. It needs its own Kobayashi Maru type reference or type, you know. They could have hinted at that with the Kessel Run, and everybody thinks it's so impressive. You did it in 12 parsecs, and maybe you find out like Han, and then you've watched the Han Solo movie, and Han's like, well, not if you round down, you know. It's like,
well, not if you round down, and the fact that, you know, oh, we nearly died, and it's not like this is some groundbreaking thing that anyone else ever wants to replicate.
Yeah,
like, no.
Yeah, it was a genuine apocalyptic life or death situation, not almost a race like it sounded like. Yeah, because when they first mentioned the Kessel Run, it almost sounds like a drag race in space or something. So, you know, like a kind of linear distance, just a battle between two ships. And I guess maybe I was going to say in the original Star Wars, they could have maybe alluded to the trench run as being like the ultimate thing that made Luke stand out as a special character, not just like an everyday hero in the army of the rebels, because that's something that is really intrinsic to Kirk's character and makes him quirky, brash, arrogant. He can be abrasive with people, but it also kind of makes him special, and yet gives reason for his character to be that way inclined, because he knows that he can just think outside the box, bend the rules to suit his will, and that informs his character. And that is one thing that really struck me in revisiting The Wrath of Khan, because I've seen it maybe twice, And that doesn't mean that I don't think it's a fantastic film. I would put it in both columns as one of the greatest of all time sequels and one of my favorite sequels for what it does. Just in the contrast of how much information you get about Khan and Kirk's history that isn't necessary exposition, that doesn't need to take up minutes and minutes of screen time in the film, yet it's all inferred in very specific dialogue between the two groups of characters and never between the main heroes and the villain. That's expert level writing, because you don't need to have this kind of bash them over the head. Oh, well, this is the story from before. You might have missed this out. That was in a TV series long ago. You can go in and appreciate Star Trek as a great film, The Wrath of Khan, without having ever heard of Khan before. There's enough within the film, and even within the introduction, initially mysterious when they're on SETI Alpha 5, not 6. The way that it is mystery when you first see Khan. They're all, him and his crew are in that Dune style gear, and then confronting them, on their ship, the Botany Bay. You have mystery, which is slowly peppered in with a little bit more of Khan's personality as you go through the film, and you see more and more of how, on the one hand, he's this theatrical Shakespearean villain and kind of quite hammy and melodramatic, but on the other hand, he's incisive, and he has elements of Spock's character in being quite logical and focused. He has elements of Kirk's character in being fixated upon the victory and wanting to achieve the goal, and proves a terrifying adversary for the entire Enterprise crew and not just Kirk himself. That is something that makes Khan, I think, stand out as one of the great supervillains. And then I hadn't really thought about it until your comment mentioning that one of the greatest characters in science fiction generally. Because when you think of Star Trek, if you've seen The Wrath of Khan, his character stands out almost to the same level as Kirk and Spock and Uhura and Zula and Bones, the original, Scotty, Chekhov. I'd say Khan comes to mind in that same realm as the core crew and the main characters.
Well, I think I'm going to stop you there, because I think we've hit on yet another topic for a whole nother show, which is, greatest science fiction villains of all times and comparing them to, science fiction villains in Star Wars. That could be a whole nother topic, and we are just about out of time here. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. And if you want more content on this and talking about Rogue One and sequels and prequels and things, Andor August, we mentioned Solo, the Solo movie in this. All of those are going to be watch-alongs in Andor August. We are going to have our own Andor preview show, maybe more than one from the sound of it, that, we're talking about a deep dive on Rogue One. So join us on the Virtual Cantina Network for Andor August, starting with a bonus week on July the 28th, where we go ahead and we're going to start watching along with some episodes of the Clone Wars to get you prepared. And join us on Monday nights with Mark Von Olen and Ashley Brenzo for Rebels Revisited, where they talk about the Star Wars Rebels episodes with characters and plot lines that are going to probably help you understand a little bit of the action that happens in the Andor show. So please join us for Andor August, and let's everybody wrap up. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't really have much else to say on it, but yeah, greatest sequels and Architurias, and it'll be fun for Andor August to do further dives on this topic. We can get a lot of mileage out of it.
No, absolutely. I think talking about the sequels and the greatest second films, it's something that could go on as a jumping point into discussing like the other franchises and how they compare to Star Wars. And definitely that conversation of seeing the genre of Star Trek being a specific sci-fi genre versus Star Wars, and yet still they're in the public consciousness and the mass market, as well as with the genre fans, which is something that really makes, I think, both IPs stand out, and it's something we can explore more of what makes Star Wars so rich in or August coming forward. So looking ahead to that.
Well, until we see you again on the Unifying Force, live long and prosper.
Yes, live long.
live long and live long and may the Force be with you.
There you go.
And prosper too. Okay.